Well, I guess you know what's on our mind.
Yes, the Public Records Act.
What were you thinking?
Well-
Did you, let's just stop it. What were you?
Well, we never intended to undermine the Public Records Act. The issue of state mandates crops up in a variety of contexts during the budget, and it cropped up in this context. And the administration proposed that we change the shalls to may, not to undermine the Public Records Act, but to say that it should not be the state taxpayers' responsibility to pay for local governments doing what they...
Hi, Steve Rossi.
Hi, Steve, of course. Doing what they should be doing as a matter of good public policy and transparency. And yet, obviously, it was seen very different from our intent. And we heard the outcry, and we are changing the decision, which is all you can do when you get criticized because good people see an issue different than the way that you intended it. And, and it was also becoming a significant distraction to the otherwise very good result that I think was accomplished in the state budget. And so after a few days of figuring out how to come together, the governor, the assembly, and the Senate, I think we now have a very good course, which is we will restore the mandate to the way it was, but then also pass a constitutional amendment for the June 2012 ballot to clarify, to enshrine the mandate, to enshrine the protection of the Public Records Act into the state constitution, but clarify that the state taxpayers should not be paying local governments for what they should be doing on their own. And I think that's a good two-step course, one that we can do immediately, obviously, and we will on Monday.
Just getting back to, I don't want to dwell on the original reaction because we certainly appreciate the change, but it seemed like at first you and the governor just, no way, forget it, we're not going to change this thing. I mean, did you talk to your caucus about that? I mean,
Well,
Perez was out there, of course they had rejected this several times.
No, I mean, in fairness, it wasn't part of the originally assembly budget, but they supported it in the conference committee, and they supported AB 76. They supported the bill.
Right.
And so the speaker, was the first one to come out days later and say, we are going to reverse course. Again, my feeling, and I won't speak for the governor, was that this was an issue about clarifying who ought to pay for a mandate. Now, I'm not going to defend it or try to win the argument here,
yeah.
but I do think in terms of explanation, what the trailer bill did say was that the only way that a local government could legally avoid the mandate would be to notice and hold a public hearing and make a public declaration that they were not going to assist the public in complying with the Public Records Act. So it was not like it was just left bare, and that may not be the winning argument, but it's mitigation in terms of, again, what the intent was. And again, I'm not trying to win the argument because we're going to change course, but I do want to say that from where I stand, part of the feeling was when I look at the state mandates, okay, and I look at the budget. So we had a lot of real successes in this budget. We restored dental care for 3 million Californians. The single largest augmentation on the non-98 side, non-education side, was for mental health, which I'm very proud of. $200 million. We did big things in career tech ed, the middle class scholarship. We restored grants for CalWorks. So we had a loss too. And the loss was that we tried, but we just could not fit in the budget numbers. Not restoration, but expanding behavioral therapy for autistic kids under Medi-Cal. Because the administration maintained, we had a difference in terms of the estimates, but they said it's tens of millions of dollars to pay for that. So I look at all of the things that we can't do on the Health and Human Services side, especially. And then I look at that mandate, tens of millions of dollars, and the juxtaposition also influences me as well. So again, we didn't see the outcry, and we saw it as a who pays issue, mistakenly. And now we hear from the people, and we will now do the right thing.
Is the state actually paying for that?
Well, no, I mean, that's the irony of it is that, but it's a buildup of a debt.
Okay, it's a debt.
We don't actually, it's a debt.
So cities don't bill you for this?
No, a lot of these mandates have been, quote, suspended, right? And nobody's had an outcry about that. It just, but the debt builds up.
So it's part of the budget.
Well, there's not a line item in the budget now for paying this mandate, but it's a debt that a future legislature could if there was ever an actual claim made.
So was the LAO estimate, which seemed crazy high to a lot of us, was that assuming the
buildup?
The buildup.
I assume the buildup, not necessarily the annual cost, but the buildup.
Okay. Okay. On who should pay, I can actually see that argument both ways.
Right.
But the argument for the state paying, I would see as being similar to the courts. There ought to be, this guarantee ought to be like the guarantee of a jury trial, if you want one, and the things we do. The state funds courts partly because you need, it's in the state's interest to have equal justice.
Right.
And sort of seeing this in the same pattern.
Well, I can tell you this. I'm only got another 18 months, so but as long as
You're
I'm
going
here.
to be mayor second.
Well, that's what I hear. That we will not have another mandate discussion in the state budget as long as I'm around. I mean, the mandate issue is a legitimate issue that ought to be discussed separate and apart from trying to solve a budget. It's a constitutional provision, and the principle of the mandate law is sound, right? That if the state says you have to do something, then instead of pay for it. But the truth of the matter is, like Dwight Eisenhower once referred to the military-industrial complex, there is a mandate industrial complex in Sacramento. It's true. There are a lot of people who make a living looking at every, I'm going to get in trouble. I shouldn't say it. But, we pay for the posting of city council agendas.
Right.
The state taxpayers pay for that. And I don't want to make light of it because that public notice is very, very important. But really, there are a lot of those kinds of mandates. And as we realign, which we have done in a very significant way, obviously in the criminal justice arena and in the child welfare area, I think it is a legitimate question to say, the state should pay for its responsibilities, the local government should pay for what they should be doing, regardless of whether or not there's a constitutional state mandate. And so we'll take that question to the voters in June. In the meantime, we'll fully restore the mandate Monday, and then the governor will sign it.
Just before this meeting, Ollie, send around a copy copy of a constitutional amendment that you would be proposing?
I don't know whether it
This
was
is from
my,
Leno's office.
oh, from Mark Leno's office.
Oh, but I thought
Okay.
it was by both of, oh.
Well, yeah,
okay.
I'm the joint author. Oh,
Right.
Is my name on there?
They said they screwed up on that part.
I'm the,
This is old language at the top.
it's old
of their
language, yeah,
stuff.
I'll be the joint author of the bill as I,
Okay.
yeah.
So, and I didn't have
And
time.
I haven't reviewed it yet.
Oh, okay.
I've not
Well,
reviewed it yet.
Okay, well, then we can all just set this aside.
Yeah.
I was, Mark Levine put out a news release yesterday that talked about doing what we've just
Yeah.
been talking about, but also including in the constitutional amendment that the legislature could not amend the Public Records Act unless it was to make it stronger.
Huh. We'll take a good look at that. I mean, I want to review the language. Certainly, if that helps to clarify that it was never our intent to make it weaker, you know, I'd be open to that. I'd want to look at it.
Would you get back to us, have somebody shoot us an email at some point? I realize
Sure.
probably not Friday,
Sure.
but
Early
let
next
us-
week, is
early
that
next
okay? On
week
the
would be
Levine,
great to
on
know.
that issue, sure.
Yeah.
Happy to.
Okay.
Happy to.
Are there other questions on
Is
this?
there anything more you want to say about it?
Well, I don't think so. And I'm
Okay,
happy. I'm
one
happy to
question
answer
I
more
have.
questions.
How could you not have anticipated that taking on an act that is one of the essences of how reporters and journalists do their job, that you wouldn't get a total outrage reaction?
Because our belief, and again, we understand the reaction, is that local governments would do what they are supposed to do anyways. And in fact, the way it was written, again, said that they have to, the mandate continues unless they make a public declaration with a vote of their city council or board of supervisors that they're no longer going to follow the mandate.
Of course, those of us trying to get that information spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year forcing cities and every little agency around to really do what they're supposed to do. It's not like a lot of government agencies willingly provide information.
Yeah, one of our reporters, Tom Peel, said that he thought maybe 50% of the requests he makes are fulfilled without litigation or warning from a lawyer or something. It's that.
And that's why I understand the sensitivity of this issue, even though the intent was not to weaken the act. But I understand the sensitivity, and you know, you have to have humility in this business, and when you hear from the people that you know, a decision, even a decision in good faith that you have made was not the correct decision, then you make a different decision and do so and own it. And I'm here today. I didn't cancel.
He didn't.
You're lucky you weren't here Wednesday.
Yeah.
I'm lucky I wasn't.
What other topics, Barbara, do we have?
A number of them. Rachel seems to be eager to get in here.
I had a
Rachel.
couple of educational
Yes.
related questions. So I wanted to ask you about the local control funding formula and how that ended up. And I know you had probably two particular concerns about that. One was the concentration
Right.
factor, and one was the accountability provisions. And I wanted to ask how you felt about how those both ended up, and in particular on the accountability provisions. What should folks be looking for as that process moves forward with the
Sure.
state board?
There was a third issue though too that sort of developed over time, and that was the amount of the base grants,
Right.
which actually turned out to be the overriding issue
Right,
when it
yeah.
came to the. And they are all the two are connected to the concentration grant. So maybe on that issue first.
Yeah.
My feeling was, and you know, it's not that I radically changed my opinion, but we made compromises here, was that the concentration grant was not my favorite approach because it would give that extra amount of resource to a low-income child in a low-income district, but not a low-income child in a low-income neighborhood, but in a district that was not considered low-income based upon where the line was drawn. That concerned me. In addition, the whole issue of accountability, looking at the governor's original January proposal, was a significant concern, because while categorical programs I know have their critics, and there is a better way of financing public education than a bunch of separate programs, they also serve an important purpose, and that is to make sure that there is attention paid to a particular subset of students or a particular approach that is evidence-based and successful. So I'm happy with the outcome on a couple of grounds. Number one, we were able to, and one thing that I really, it took a while for it to dawn on me and maybe to the public, is that these numbers we're talking about are targets. They're not the end, they're targets. And and we had a dispute with the administration about, at one point, about what do we use, the LAO's revenue numbers or finance, and in a weird way, it really was not relevant to the question, because the numbers are targets. If there's more money, districts reach the targets faster, and then you start, and then you grow from there. If there's less money, then the target isn't reached for a longer period of time. So I was satisfied because we were able to raise the base grant target to assure that no district's target would be less than a target based on where they would have been at the high water mark of 07-08, adjusted for inflation. And Prop 30, in my view, was never about trying to increase funding dramatically for public education, even though we must do that, in my view. It was about stopping the bleeding. So that metric, I think, represents that objective. The concentration grant, I frankly, from my end, sort of made a compromise, even though I still don't like the concept. But with the higher base grant and the supplemental, I felt that low-income children were going to make significant advances. On the accountability side, I think that's where we achieved a real significant win, because, for example, for years, I know I have, as an advocate for foster kids, have been trying to get the educational outcomes of foster kids disaggregated. That's now part of the local control funding formula. We did the same thing, we're going to require districts to look at their subgroups and make sure that there is growth and improvement among various subgroups. And I think that is very significant. The other thing I was real happy about, which sort of got a little unsung, but is we were able to get $250 million to expand linked learning, career technical education. Even though it's one-time money, next year, I'm still here, and it'll be two-time money, I hope, especially if they get the first 250 out in an aggressive way. But that's a tenfold increase of the amount of money we spend on partnership academies in California. And my view of education reform, I know we've talked about this before, is that while the partisans are arguing about, who should run the schools, and how easy it should be to fire teachers or not, the real issue is how do we better connect public education with the high-wage economy and the new economy. And I'm absolutely convinced the key to improving workforce preparation and to reducing the dropout rate is to adopt the model of linked learning across the board, where you merge academic rigor and career application. And now we're going to have a very a major opportunity to expand that approach. So I'm very happy about that.
Do you think that the potential ramifications for if a district or school doesn't meet the targets are strong enough? Or, I mean, I know they're still sort of to be worked out partly by the state board,
Partly
but-
by the board. Well, the carrots versus sticks approach has to be managed, I think, very intelligently. Because do you really help a district by taking money away from them when they're not performing? Does that hurt kids or does it hurt the administrators? I mean, there is the ability of, you know, in the law that we wrote for the county superintendents to be able to step in and take significant action. We seek to replicate the FICMAT
Right.
approach that most people in the education world believe has actually been a very successful state endeavor to help districts that are financially in trouble or mismanaged recover. That same approach around educational improvements, I think, is a good way to go. Okay.
Shall we talk prisons?
Sure.
How long can California get away with continuing to appeal these orders?
Well, this is a very serious issue, but it's one where I side with the governor because I think, and it's delicate because, you know, we have this system of federalism, we have this separation of powers where you respect the role of all of the entities, including the federal courts, right? And their job is to interpret the Constitution. So obviously we have great respect for them, but they do not have the responsibility constitutionally to decide how to spend limited public resources. And that, I think, is where the rub is and where the tension is. Because when I look at the court orders and some of the suggestions that the courts have made, like reducing prison overcrowding by building more local jail capacity, and I look at the tens of millions of dollars that it would cost to do that, I have a constitutional responsibility as well to decide how to spend limited state resources. And if we spend it on building more jail capacity, then we're not spending it on rehabilitation, on substance abuse treatment, on mental health treatment. Now, we had a huge win in the mental health area, as I alluded to earlier. We are going to fund the capacity for 2,000 crisis beds, 600 triage workers at emergency rooms, at jails, at social service facilities to be able to help navigate family members and people from places of last resort to crisis beds to the level of care and treatment that they need. And so our tension, and my point in saying that is I think that is a much better investment of taxpayer dollars to combat recidivism and reduce the prison population over time. And so this is the you could call it a constitutional clash, if you will, because the other thing that the federal courts, in my view, have not sufficiently recognized is the dramatic steps we have taken to reduce the prison population. I mean, like, realignment was like no big thing, I guess. It was the most significant change in criminal justice policy in many decades. It has resulted in, you know, over 40,000 inmates being released from state prisons. It has caused an outcry in some communities, and certainly among our Republican colleagues, about jeopardizing public safety. And so now we're getting it from that end, where county sheriffs and others are saying, this realignment thing has gone far enough, thank you. And the court's saying, well, you've got to release another 9,000 or 10,000 prisoners. So I think that this is, and the other thing, it may have been, and was, in fact, 5 years ago, that you could accurately describe the prison management as being dysfunctional. All of the chaos and the problems between the management and the Correctional Peace Officers Association, who runs the prisons, all of that. You cannot make that same claim today. Governor Brown is managing the prisons well. And we believe it's time that the courts allow us to manage our limited public resources in the best way we can, recognize the significant progress that we have made in reducing the prison population, and allow us some flexibility to focus as much or more on reducing recidivism than building more jail capacity.
Isn't the argument back, though, from their standpoint, that the state has been irresponsible in the past? And I can see and respect your position, but irresponsible enough to create this situation that they need to spend extra money to solve it, because it's not solved yet.
Irresponsible going back several decades, yes. Irresponsible over the past 2.5 years, no. Just the opposite.
But the conditions
Just the
you're
opposite.
saying is still constitutes cruel and unusual.
Well, I understand that, and I respect that the federal courts interpret the Constitution. But states need some flexibility too to manage its limited public resources, and that's why I think it is appropriate for the governor to appeal the decision, to see if the higher court recognizes that there has to be some context here and a recognition of that progress, and we'll see what happens after that.
So you can just appeal this again? It just
Well,
seems
there's
like-
an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, and
Yeah.
that's,
Do you
I think,
that's
it.
the case?
I don't know.
Could I ask you? This is a tough one, and I respect your.
The last one wasn't tough?
First one, so.
Oh, this
yeah,
one.
So let me move on to an easier one. Can we
Okay.
talk about water?
Sure.
You pushed through a water bond issue that we largely supported. We thought it was too big and needed to come down, which I think.
And comprehensive water policy changes
Yeah,
too.
and we were in support of that. We've not been in support of the Bay Delta plan. And so I saw you made an interesting remark about a month ago.
Yeah.
About how they are related, which I would agree with. And I sort of like, what is your view about where this goes from here?
Well, so I made a controversial speech before the Association of California Water Agencies, because everybody has sort of lived with this safe fiction that the water bond is separate from the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. Well, they don't have to come together, because, legislature can deal with the water bond, and of course the BDCP is an administrative branch, federal government species-related process that doesn't require legislative action. And I guess I've been around this now long enough to know that while that may be true technically, it's not true in reality. Because in order to modify a water bond, it will require a 2/3 supermajority. And in order to get those 2/3 supermajority in an area that's contentious, no matter what the circumstances are, if there is this continued major dispute around the Delta and the conveyance issue, I don't think it's possible to get that 2/3 vote. And so my suggestion was that not that we integrate the water bond with the BDCP, but that we had better be focused on finding a solution to the BDCP sooner rather than later. And then the controversial part, and they mixed the water bond up, and I want to separate that because maybe I have a chance to clarify that here. What I said with regard to the BDCP was that maybe we need to change that debate. Because so long as it is a discussion and debate about the size of the tunnels, the religious fervor with which people argue this is never going to go away. because that is symbolic. It's real too. It's not just symbolic. It's very real, but it's also symbolic. I suggested in my speech that maybe we ought to be trying to solve this in a different way. Because when you look at why there's so much distrust, there's many reasons. But one of the legitimate reasons is that if they build a project of whatever size and say that, well, only so much water, for example, is going to flow in these pipes, how can the people from Northern California and living in and around the Delta know that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, that is going to be, those promises are going to be upheld? Well, they shouldn't trust. Why should they? So what I suggested was, maybe we write the operational conditions into a constitutional amendment, or into a statute, or into something that is actually binding. If the agreement really is that regardless of the size of the pipes, that only so much water can flow under various conditions, then how do we ensure that that promise is a binding promise? And I just said, and this is where it got a little confusing, but there are a lot of ways to make a binding promise. One is to do a constitutional amendment. One would be to write the conditions into a water bond, and that's where people conflated the water bond with the other thing. But I was just saying, in general, let's focus on the conditions, make them binding instead of the size of the pipe, and maybe that would be a more productive way of trying to resolve the problem. Now, parenthetically, if we don't solve that problem in some way, I think it's going to be harder
No,
to get a 2/3 supermajority to do a water bond.
it's impossible.
So,
The bond was so huge to begin with.
yeah, and again, I don't want to be defensive about it. You know, we got a lot of criticism for it, but we overcame decades of intransience in putting that water package together. It was the Delta Stewardship Council, it was the water conservation, it was the water reuse, it was all of that, the whole governance issue, and the water bond. Well, again, to get a 2/3, include surface storage. Remember, we had we didn't have the 2/3 supermajority. Surface storage, as well as the good environmental investments, the size grew. Now we got to ratchet it down in order to have any chance of passing.
So you are planning to ratchet it down?
No, I'm saying two things. Number one, I think it is tough to get any water bond passed without solving the BDCP problem. But I'm saying, however and whenever we do a water bond, the size must be much smaller.
Okay.
You don't take an 11. No, it's got to be well below $10 billion. Well below.
When do you start on that, or is
We're
that
still-
something for the next?
No, we're starting now.
Yeah.
I mean, we're working on it. And it's one thing to come up. We already know how to do it. It's the question of how do you get any change through the legislature, and what election are the voters most likely to approve it? Because ultimately it's up to the voters.
What election do you think the voters are most likely to approve?
Well, I think if the BDCP thing can be resolved, we ought to get it on the ballot in 14. If there's some clear direction on BDCP, but I got to tell you, this is troubling to me. The Metropolitan Water Agency sued
Yeah.
on the Delta Plan. Well, the Delta Plan was a result of our 2009 legislation, the Stewardship Council, and it's based on the co-equal goals of water supply reliability and Delta ecosystem restoration. They sued on the bare plan. That's troubling to me. That doesn't portend progress here. So, I'm a glass half full person. We got the 2009 deal done when nobody said we can do it. Maybe we can get a 2014 deal done as well.
It seems to me the difference between where you went and where this is going now is the true sort of emphasis on the health of the Delta, and then also sort of the true sort of fairness of water management. When
Yes.
I say that, I mean, making sure that supplies are going to the right places.
Correct. And that there's an emphasis on conservation and on other water strategies that don't just require more water to be pumped. So it's something actually for me, given my history with the 09 agreement, that now that the budget's in better shape and I can avoid new unanticipated controversies, that I really want to make this a major project in my last 18 months, working with the governor and the assembly and others. And the
So maybe that's
stakeholders.
another question. Go ahead, I have a healthcare question. I congratulate, I think the Medi-Cal expansion, the mental health, I think those are really some big steps forward. So
Yeah.
overall, I think it's been some great moves there. Is there any appetite at all to revisit what I think is a pretty big deal, which is the Medi-Cal provider rates in California? And the problem there is, I probably don't need to tell you, is if you want to get people to care for
Yes.
people, we're in trouble.
So there is a big appetite, and I anticipate there was a couple of observations. Number one, it was a little bit of a myth in some ways that we had some disagreement with the governor about how much to spend. We really didn't. I mean, yes, initially the LAO comes out with its revenues, finance has his revenues. That's kind of the way it's framed. But the truth of the matter is that having been through the awful deficit years, nobody wanted to go back. I don't want to go back to 09 or 11. And so from the very get-go, we established very targeted, specific priorities and said to the governor, look, no matter whose revenues we choose to use, we've got to get some things done in these areas. And for me, it was dental, and my caucus, dental, mental health, and career technical education. Now, on the Medi-Cal rates, the problem there is that the price tag is really large. It's like $600-700 million. But and so here's the way this thing is being set up, and I think in a good way, which is that by agreeing to the lower revenue estimates and still fulfilling our priorities, there's only upside now on the revenue. And since there's only upside now on the revenue, I see as if not the major priority on the Health and Human Services side for next year's budget being the rate increases. Because healthcare reform only works, dental restoration only really works, if you have enough providers to be able to be able to care for people. So I think we will get that done, and we'll get that done before the 2013-14 session is over, as long as there isn't some economic catastrophe or the trends aren't what they appear to be in a positive way.
So your sense is that it will be clear maybe halfway through the year that there's more money?
There will be, but I'm not saying that we will necessarily do it in January, but I think it'll be teed up for the 2014-15 budget at the latest. That's my belief.
A couple little things
Yeah.
to ask you
And
about.
anybody else?
Oh, yeah.
Steve, did you have anything?
No.
Ken, did you have anything else? Okay. Rachel?
Couple little things. One I wanted to ask you, last time you were here, you talked about this plan to, it had to do with bonds and businesses and career technical
Oh.
education.
No, I did.
A little
Well-
confusing, but I wanted to see where that stands.
Well, we won. That's the
Oh.
$250 million.
That's what that is.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Now we have, I'm still going to do some implementing legislation to focus a little bit more on the bond, because we didn't capture the bond
Okay.
concept in the budget.
Okay, that's what.
All the experts kind of said to me, that I was being it was a little too complicated.
That's fine.
The bond, so what we did was, we got the money, and the same structure in terms of school districts and regional school district business consortium applying for the money to invest in high school career academies. The pay for performance, which is really the bond,
Okay,
I think I'm going to do in implementing legislation. I
okay.
still think it's a great idea. I mean, the idea that the private sector direct investment in matching the public funds, that they get rewarded with a higher rate of return if the partnership shows increases in student achievement over time. So, but we got the money, and that's the start.
Our colleague from the East Bay, Daniel Bornstein, couldn't be here today, but I feel him channeling through me a question about public employee pensions and what you're gonna do about it.
You mean beyond the big thing that we did last year?
Yes.
Well, I think, one, we're going to continue to monitor and insist that local governments, for example, follow through on the law which requires that all employees, including existing employees, pay up to 50% of the normal cost of their pensions. Number two, I think we do have to get to and address the STRS pension shortfall. Three, we need to look at whether or not the Affordable Care Act and the setup of exchanges and where the country and state are moving there provides us any cost relief over time on retiree health care. So there's a whole host of things that we need to keep our eye on. But I saw last year as a major step. You know, it organized labor. I mean, for example, you know, collective bargaining is a very precious principle, and it's something I take very seriously. By requiring existing employees as a matter of law to contribute up to 50% of the normal cost of their pensions, we went around collective bargaining. Because of the magnitude of the issue and the seriousness of the issue.
Up to 50%.
Up to 50%. No, 50%.
50%.
You have to get to 50% over the course of
Yeah,
5
up to,
years.
okay.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
if I misstated that? Did I
thought
say
that was-
up to?
You did, but.
At least 50%.
For
At
new,
least-
that's for new employees.
No.
That's-
It's for existing employees as well. That's the key. That's the underrated part, if you will.
That
Over
has
the
not
course-
been challenged.
No. Over the course of 5 years, all current employees must contribute at least 50% of the annual cost of their pensions. It's one of the reasons why this was controversial.
So we're probably running down. I just wanted to bring up another possibly lost cause, which is CEQA reform.
Well, it's not lost cause. That's the other one where I'm the lead author here. Got a full package of things, of bills this year. So I have 731, which moved through the Senate, is now in the Assembly, set for its first committee hearing, I believe, on the 1st of July. And we are at that stage now where we are working with the stakeholders on all sides to suggest one more significant set of amendments to complete this work and have it move through. And the issue is this. It's sort of a long story. I'll try to give the short version. But, you know, last year at the end of the session, the business community, backed by then Senator Rubio, tried to pass SB 317. It was, overstating a little bit but not much, replacing CEQA with standards across the board. 731 takes some of that approach by saying that land use related standards like traffic, like noise, like parking, like aesthetics can be objectified. Some call them standards, some call them thresholds of significance. My bill authorizes the Office of Planning and Research to adopt those thresholds of significance so that a project developer in an infill area, because my bill is limited to infill, can check that box and then be able to move on. We are also in my bill allowing for more broader tiering. For example, if a city or county adopts a recent specific plan or area plan and has done a full EIR in that plan and the project is consistent with that plan, then you don't have to do an EIR a second time. We also suggest significant litigation reform, where now a trial judge who says there's a CEQA violation essentially in most instances remands the entire project in EIR back to the city or county, and then it goes to the bottom of the pile and can take years, right, before it's reconsidered. What we say very clearly is that a judge can say, well, I'm going to remand this part of the project back to the local governments, but so long as there's no prejudice to the environment, the rest of the project can move forward. There's one remaining issue that we're negotiating, and that is the definition of infill. Because now infill is largely limited to residential mixed-use projects. And the proponents of CEQA reform are arguing, well, what about universities, hospitals, and other desirable public and private projects? And I'm open to expanding the definition of infill to capture more projects so that this regulatory relief that's contained within all the other parts of the bill can be had by a broader scope of projects. But, even in infill areas, you don't want to give regulatory relief to smokestacks. You want the projects to be clean and green as well. So we're negotiating that, and I'm relatively confident we're going to have a good, solid product at the end.
So I thought when a city does a specific plan, an area plan, and does the EIR on it, the point of that is that developers ought to be able to come in and.
That is the point, but number one, a lot of cities and counties have not had the resources or the wherewithal to update their plans. And so you can't rely on an old plan, right, for a new project. And sometimes projects are not necessarily consistent with the specific plan. There may be a variation, in which case you need to do more environmental analysis in order to do that. But we're trying to make it easier. And we're also trying to find some money, whether it's out of, the someday to be collected cap and trade money, or otherwise to be able to assist cities and counties in updating their various planning documents so that they can take greater advantage of the so-called tiering opportunities.
Are the environmental folks okay with that limited standards approach? I know they were really objecting.
Some are, some are not. I mean, they're not monolithic. There are some who don't like it. But, this is why this is a hard issue, because there are those who believe that the statute is great, perfect, and shouldn't be touched. There are those who think it's irrevocably broken and should be scrapped. And obviously, I think the answer lies in updating the statute to, and it's tough because, well, some would say, what this is really about are how do you stop the competitor from using the law to leverage a result, right? It's the bad motive. Well, you can't legislate bad motives in most instances. You can try, but that's not effective. So why this is hard is that you have to actually get inside the statute and look at the provisions and say, aha, this is often used to protect the environment. But sometimes it's used to leverage unfairly. So is this particular provision used more often to help the environment or to leverage unfairly, and thus what do you do about it? And that's why each of these things are sort of subjective. I mean, take traffic, for example. That's not an illegitimate environmental issue. On the other hand, what I think we're saying in this bill is that there's some things that can be more easily objectified in ways that streamline the process and make it easier to get good projects built. Okay?
Any other questions?
I thank you for having me. No, I mean, you know, aside from the recent things we've talked about, it's been a very good year. I mean, and California is really on an upswing. I mean, when you contrast with 5 years ago, it's amazing and you get it from other parts of the country now. I'm talking to other people throughout the country, and you know, you never rest on your laurels. Obviously, the work's never done, but it's better. And I think this budget, by and large, with some of these restorations, even limited restorations, reflect a whole lot more hope. So, thank you.